2022, the final day of Bioeconomy Ireland Week, and it's coming, as I said, from the BioWill Interreg Northwest Europe project. I think the event was described on Eventbrite as a fireside chat. So there was flashing images in my head of wood being used as firewood, but luckily, thanks to our speakers today, we're going to be looking at much more interesting applications of wood using a zero waste biorefinery approach focused on what we could do from the willow tree. And so we have a great set of speakers coming here today. So if you want to flick on there, Neil, we have Professor J.J. Leahy, who's an associate professor in the Department of Chemical Sciences at the University of Limerick. And JJ has great expertise in the area of biorefining technologies, particularly around thermochemical and chemical processing. We have JP Prendergast, who's the founder and CEO of Epithel, who are a company focused on the production of skin and healthcare formulations. And JP also has a really strong background in the area of renewable energy and is doing a lot of work there as well. We have Chris Johnson, who's principal scientist and project leader at the Environment and Renewable Energy Centre at AFBI, the Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute in Northern Ireland. And finally, we have Neil Burke, who's a scientific project manager for Shannon Applied Biotechnology Centre at Munster Technological University. So I think to begin with, and if you want to push on, Neil, to the next slide, what we're going to start with is an introduction from JP, who's going to give us a bit of background to Epithel and their role on the project, but also to give us a bit of context for the background to the BioWill project. So over to you, JP.
Thanks, James. First of all, welcome everyone. Great to have an audience for BioWill to show all the good work that's going on. A bit of a background to this project. Epithel, our own company, has been involved in the last 8 years in developing patents in products which are used as alternatives to antibiotics. And we're in the midst of just finishing clinical trials and looking for medicines approval both in Europe and US to launch our product next year. How this project started was a conversation with JJ years ago when I came into his desk and annoyed the poor man one day looking for a source of salicylic acid, whereas it's a natural aspirin, where basically originated from an aspect of salicin from willow tree. And this is old news, really. This has gone on for decades and centuries, whereby the willow tree was grown to as a supplement or a medicine in the monasteries and beyond. And where we were interested in this case was I would have a big interest in biomass. I would have seriously a big interest in wood chip. The short rotational crop for me was an opportunity whereby could we extract a salicin from this project, or a value, a high level value, which would then lead to a combination or a stream of other deliverables, which would give us a circular economy, zero waste type biorefinery model. The team, so my role at the moment within this is also Epithel, but we're down as the project manager of BioWill, and University of Limerick are the lead partner in this project for the Interreg project. We're on our last year next year, so far so good, and I'm going to let everyone come in and discuss what's been delivered. Just the basis to which we took the project. A lot of this project has been based on a commercial deliverable as much as a research project. So we've probably taken this very seriously from a point of view in LCA, referencing back to a business plan. So hopefully by the end of next year, we will have a project which will give us a circular economy model based on growing willow in Ireland and beyond, allowing us to extract a high value and then extract 2 more values with the marine material going into energy. And from that, then having your model. So that's the basis behind this project. And the team we have extend from AFBI, but also, as you know, Tralee, UCC, GNI, Agriland, ELO, and Maternova are partners in this project. So it's got a broad range of ability here, and deliverables can be, I think, it's an interesting project, and certainly it's coming to a stage whereby it's actually starting to deliver some really good outputs. So that's the background really to the project, James.
Thanks, JP. I'm going to bring Chris in next, if that's okay. So Chris is coming from AFBI, and I should say that Chris, you're filling in at the last moment, so you're improvising to a certain extent. But can you talk to us a little bit about AFBI's role in the project and the work that you're involved in yourself at AFBI, but then within the BioWill project?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, James. And it's nice to be asked. So thank you very much for having me. Yeah, so I suppose the background essentially would be we in AFBI have been working in willows since about the mid 1970s. Essentially, we've been working on them as biomass, so specifically for energy, in response to kind of fuel crises. Not to say that we don't have one of those at the moment as well. But that's essentially our background. So we have done a lot of work with the different willow breeders and investigating kind of yields and disease resistance and agronomy willows over the decades. So I suppose until this project, it's been about the environmental benefit of the actual crop itself. What can it do in terms of soil and biodiversity and water quality protection, that kind of stuff. However, there's never been a great value chain as such. So when BioWill came along, there was a very clear and sort of very tacit link where high value chemicals, or the types of chemicals which JP has just been discussing, could indeed lead to a different reason, sort of a reality as to why these crops should have a place in our environment, as well as all the environmental benefits and energy benefits that we touch on as well. So our role here has been to say, right, what actual crops are out there? The types of stems that we grow are, for biomass, are straight, high yielding, etc. So we can provide the energy, but we need different things from these crops. So we've gone right back to the different breeding programs, the Swedish breeding programs, European breeding programs. What varieties have been out there? What are the pre-varieties? The kind of like the parentage and the grandparentage of the clones that are currently commercials. We've gone right back to all of those using our knowledge and the literature and some real sort of fairly profound investigation as to which ones are most likely to be producing the bioactives in the quantities that we want to see them as. Then we've set up trials of over 30 different genetics, in fact, genotypes, in sites in Armagh, our plant breeding station in Loughgall, and at the UL site in County Mayo, and also in France as well. And these are replicated blocks of plots, and we so far now have harvested cutback material and 1-year-old material, and are just about to embark on 2-year-old material as well. And we have debarked that material, providing the bark to University of Limerick to do the investigation on bioactives, and of course then the material itself, the bark, the biomass, to Bangor University, where they've been working on production of the eco food packaging and similar materials. So that's really been our role so far, and so far so good. And the upcoming harvest looks meaty, I have to say. It's growing well. Even the clones that weren't particularly strong and never made it to variety, their high value and their high quantities of bioactives, actually it looks like we're growing them up well too. So it's all looking really positive.
Thanks, Chris. And I've been making a few notes, so I'll have some questions for yourself and JP a little bit later. I'm going to bring in JJ now. So JJ, you're coordinator from the University of Limerick side. Can you give us a bit of a background from your side as coordinator in the project, the role, I suppose your own background work, but also the role that you're playing within this project?
Sure. So my background is industrial chemistry, and we always had a strong interest here in chemical techniques for biorefining. And we had been involved in a previous project on the extraction of bioactive molecules from the bark of birch trees. So when JP spoke to me about this project, I was really interested. And our initial focus was salicins, because salicins are a known anti-inflammatory molecule. So, but during the course of our project, I think our interest has widened to potentially other bioactive molecules, which are also present in the bark of willow trees. So as Chris said, essentially, at various stages of growth, year 1, year 2, year 3, after the crop has been propagated in the soil, he strips the bark, he harvests some willow stems, he strips the bark, and he sends them to us. And then, using very mild solvents and using a process which is almost identical to your Italian coffee maker, we extract from the bark a liquid. So it's basically like making coffee. We put the bark, a fixed amount of bark, into a high pressure extraction unit, and using a mixture of water and bioethanol at very mild temperatures, we perform an extraction. And then we concentrate the extract, we analyze it for salicins, for other bioactive molecules, and then we send it to our partners, Niall in this case, in NTU, and he measures the extracts for their bioactivity. So we have a measure of we quantify the amount of various ingredients within the extract, and then we send them on to Niall, and he confirms whether these materials have the desired bioactivity or not. But one of the interesting things which was thrown up as we were, I suppose, initiating this project was that, as JP said, willow bark has been used for millennia, if the truth be known, as what we would call nowadays we would call it a phytopharmaceutical product, our folk medicine would be, I suppose, the old description. So people basically would have stripped the bark, they would have boiled it up in water, and they would have used the extract as an analgesic. And around 100 years ago, in the 1920s, BASF in Germany isolated what that molecule was, and it's nowadays what we call salicylic acid or aspirin. But there's a family of molecules which comprise the salicins. But what has been found from a number of in vivo testing is that if you compare a crude extract from a willow tree against a pharmaceutically pure single molecule salicin, the response is actually stronger from the crude extract. So it does suggest that either a family of these salicin glycosides, as we call them, or these bioactive molecules may be more effective as an anti-inflammatory agent than the single molecule chemistry. And that has been one of the things which we have found so interesting, or at least that I have found so interesting from this. But the beauty of this biorefinery is that it's feasible at a relatively small scale. And as Chris didn't highlight it, but growing willow trees has a number of other benefits, for farmers as a crop, because in terms of remediating excess phosphate and other excess nutrients, from slurry spreading, there are also some potential benefits. So that's our role and my role basically. And obviously, so we're doing the chemistry, and Niall then is doing, adding the real value by providing a measure of how the strength of the biological response from these extracts.
JJ, and once again, we'll be coming back for some questions in a little while. Neil, coming to you next, would you mind talking a bit about the role, finally, of Shannon ABC within the project and a bit of background to the work you're doing at Shannon ABC as well?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, James. So for those who don't know me, my name is Neil Burke. I'm a business development scientist and a scientific project manager with Shannon ABC. So Shannon ABC is a collaboration between MTU, which is Munster Technological University, and the Technological University of the Shannon. So we're based in Kerry, on the Kerry campus, and the majority of our work that's involved in the BioWill takes place there. So Shannon ABC is a technology gateway. It's Enterprise Ireland funded, and its remit is to deliver bioscience R&D solutions to Irish SMEs. All right, so that's our day job. We have lots of interesting research projects that we're involved in, and BioWill is one of the most interesting ones. Of course, I'm biased because I'm heavily involved in it, but ultimately what we do is we are, as JJ mentioned, we are testing the bioactivity of the willow bark extracts, and this is something that we routinely do with Shannon ABC. We commonly test the natural extracts and ingredients using mammalian cell culture models. So specifically for the BioWill project, we're looking for bioactivity for human skin. And for that purpose, we use human skin cell lines in the lab. So we receive the willow bark extract preparations from UL. We will test different concentrations and different preparations of those extracts, introducing them to human skin cells in a flask, essentially. And we're looking for things like antioxidant properties, anti-inflammatory properties. Can they confer some wound healing, and can they improve the skin barrier or the skin integrity? And to date, we've shown some very promising results. So we have a PhD student called Arnold Mirza who's working on this, and a research assistant called Danimal, and they have shown very, very promising results, specifically for the anti-inflammatory. And it's not a surprise given the history with salicin and salicylic acid. But I suppose what I'd like to highlight is that it was mentioned a while ago, there's a lot more in the bark extracts other than salicins, and there's a family of the salicins in there. But depending on the preparation, you might actually get a majority of, we'll say, other bioactives, non-salicin related bioactives. And so what's going to be very interesting in the next 6 months is for us to tease out where the specific activity is coming from. Is, if it's antioxidant, is it coming from flavonoids or polyphenols, or if it's anti-inflammatory, is it coming solely from the salicin, and so on. So in the first instance, we're showing very strong bioactivity. So the next step now is to try and tease out and identify which family of bioactives are conferring each activity of interest. So yeah, that's our role in bio.
Thanks, Neil. So just a reminder for people to get the questions coming in, and we'll deal with them towards the end of the presentation. So I think, Neil, we can keep this slide up for now to help with the discussion, because this is the BioWill process diagram, and you can see it's very much a circular economy activity. So to some extent, there's no start and end point in this diagram, because some of the outputs are coming back in to produce willow trees. But it's starting maybe at the beginning at the feedstock and the production of willow, and coming to Chris first of all, I think. But I'm happy if other members of the panel want to join in and contribute. So JJ talked about some of the benefits from willow tree in terms of remediation, but are there other potential benefits, we'll say, from the point of view of climate mitigation, in terms of kind of increasing the scale of this sector on the island of Ireland, Chris?
I think that's a really good question, James, and that's what we would love to see to kind of see happening. At one point there would have been maybe, I'm going to say 3,500 hectares of willows growing on the island in total, and that was essentially brought about by government grants funding, sort of about half the cost it was to establish willow plantations. Now they were originally planted for biomass, but I think the overall environmental credentials were certainly recognized in the past. However, the current state of play is that there's no funding, there's no grant, there's no real promotion, if you like, of these kind of crops to try to allow some sort of agricultural diversification. We have worked on we are currently working on other EU projects, just to touch slightly back on the environmental protection again. One is EU catchment care. It's led by Donegal County Council, and one whole work package in that is specifically to demonstrate and clearly show that the targeting of willow plantations amongst our livestock sector, if you like, amongst the mosaic of grassland agriculture can actually improve not just water quality, but ultimately the carbon benefits, the biodiversity benefits. So those aren't directly measured in the project, but those are clearly in developing opportunities or proving opportunities that these kind of willow plantations can indeed be implemented. Then those have been modelled through another EU project we've been working on called the Bryden Centre, which has been a Queen's University-led research hub. Now, there's several publications out of that which show the long-term carbon benefits, the long-term greenhouse gas benefits, and the long-term global warming benefits over a 101-year horizon that indeed these crops can bring about as well. But ultimately, you know, on our own research farm, you know, we're showing very clearly at the moment that we're heating the farm, the majority of the farm, on biomass from our own plantations, which are intercepting, you know, diffuse runoff, point source runoff from agricultural waste waters, and that is displacing straight away a significant quantity of oil. And I would say it's probably costing us maybe 3p a kilowatt hour to produce heat at the moment from willow. I think that's a very strong benefit that a lot of people would indeed sort of recognise at the moment. And then those other parts, James, that, you know, there's plenty in the research about the ability that willow has to improve carbon sequestration, improve biodiversity, but largely it's the water quality aspects we've been focusing on within an intensive livestock sector.
Thanks, Chris. And just a question, because you referred in your presentation that you're looking at different harvests, but also across different growing sites. I'm just wondering, in terms of variation, are you seeing a lot of variation in the crops, and how is that potentially impacting on the products that you're looking at taking out of this? And that might be not, if it's not for you, it might be for someone else to come in on that. JJ, I think you've got a hand up.
So I guess there are two aspects to that question. One, the overall yield of biomass, and secondly, the yield of what we call bioactives. So, as Chris said, the particular varieties or genotypes of willow that were selected were, for want of a better word, crosses between high salicin varieties, which are normally found along the Mediterranean region or in China, and varieties which grow well under the conditions prevailing in Northwest Europe. That's why we're under the NWE, Northwest Europe banner here. So this is, and I guess what we have found, I suppose, are of the 30 varieties which we've grown so far, some are performing very well, and we're beginning to identify these now in terms of both salicin yields or bioactive yields, as well as yields of what we would call biomass material. Currently, as part of this project, the biomass material, as you can see from the figure, the idea was that once we've extracted the bark, the residual material, both bark and pulp, would be used for making packaging products, and the packaging products then would be used in an anaerobic digester, and the digestate will go back onto the soil. But an alternative, as you correctly and Chris correctly highlighted, given the current demand for energy and energy security, a potential use for the residual material would be for heating, because once you remove the bark in particular, a lot of the more problematic molecules which we find during biomass combustion, such as ash and extractives, are no longer present. So so there may be advantages both as a, you know, there's an additional step obviously, but if the value of the extracts, you know, is higher than the value of the cost of doing the stripping the bark and extracting, then obviously it makes it pay. But so far, and we've another year to go, another harvest to go, as JP said, but so far we are identifying a number of varieties which look very, very promising. A question which remains to be answered is, at what point in the growth cycle? So if you were growing for biomass, typically you harvest on year 3. So it's a 3-year harvesting cycle. What we don't fully know the answer to at this stage is, what year of harvest will provide the highest yield of bioactives? And is there a change? Again, Neil said that there are 3 different bioactivities which we're monitoring. Does that vary as a function of harvest time as well? Year 1, year 2, year 3. And so there are a number of issues here which we hope we can provide insight, if not very definitive answers to, arising from this project. But a key element, as JP said, is the overall business plan. Will this stack up in terms of because that's what NWE likes to see, will this stack up in terms of a viable, scaled up process for farmers as well as processors? And the reason Neil is focusing on, he mentioned that the cell cultures he's using are epithelial cells. And the reason we're focused on this is that the European Medicines Agency permits up to 5% of a crude salicin extract in products which go onto your skin, dermatological products, if you like, without requiring medical trials. So the expense is gone. If you have to do stage 1, stage 3 medical trials, as you would for oral medicines, then the expense can only be absorbed by the pharma companies. But for topical products, which are sometimes referred to as phytopharmaceutical, and that's because we have a crude extract, it's not a single molecule, then we're allowed to have up to 5% without requiring these medical trials. So that was a key lever in this particular project in getting funding.
Thank you, JJ. And Neil, just picking up on some of the points JJ made, can I ask you, first of all, is the bioactive ingredients solely confined to the bark part of the tree, or is there a significant part in the pulp? So that's the first thing. Then maybe to talk a little bit about the amount that you're actually taking out in terms of volume per ton of tree or per kilogram of willow. And then finally, JJ talked about the obvious advantage, if you don't have to go to medical trials, of being able to include maybe 5% of the salicylic acid or salicylins within products. What types of products would you potentially envisage these ending up in?
Yeah, no problem. So I suppose in terms of the bark and the bioactives that are within there, that's primarily what we're focusing on and what we're testing now. To answer your question, there's a possibility that the branch, the leaves contain interesting bioactives as well, and it's something that we've been discussing. We haven't yet tested them, but we're not overlooking them completely, because it's very possible that other fractions of the tree contain bioactives as well. But up to date, we've just been focusing on the bark extractives themselves. In terms of the kind of volume per weight that you're getting out of the bioactives, I'd need to refer to JJ for that, or even Chris, because I'm not too sure. We get the kind of processed version of the bark. So I don't know if the guys want to jump in on that, and then I can answer your third question then after.
So on a dry weight basis, the highest crude salicins or let's call them bioactives, is around 2%, but it varies considerably over the 30 varieties. As Chris said, we've over 30 varieties participating in these trials, so there is some considerable variation. We will be measuring leaves and what we would call pulp over the next couple of months. And interestingly, there are farmers in the UK who grow the willow crop as a forage crop for animals, because particularly the leaves are easily digestible by ruminants. So I think that there is the potential there for farmers as well to use this, not just to have the benefit in terms of water catchment areas, but also in terms of, it will provide some forage for animals as well. Sorry, I saw a question pop up there regarding the bottlenecks. I suppose it's a good question, because Willow trees tend to be, there's a harvesting season, which is relatively prolonged. Harvesting can occur over a couple of months, but bark removal requires the crop to have a high moisture content. So what we have seen is that once we harvest the crop, if we allow the rods to dry, the bark is very, very difficult to remove. So the bark has to be removed while the crop is wet. Now, there are a number of options which are being trialed in other European countries, not for salicin, but people remove the bark for other type of activities. And that would suggest that this will be the technical bottleneck for us. And this refers back to a question that James asked. Is there an option there to maybe not remove the bark, but to undertake an extraction of the whole plant? And that is because that would obviously overcome the bark, a potential bottleneck, and that is certainly something that we're going to investigate over the next few months as well. From what we've seen so far, that is the main bottleneck. I suppose another bottleneck could be in terms of anaerobic digestion. So the trials that we've conducted so far on AD have been using 100% willow, or in fact the trays. You know, we've made some trays or packaging materials, and we have undertaken anaerobic digestion at relatively small scale using these trays. The yield of biogas from 100% willow, which was the original intention of the project, is low. It's around 40%, which is economically not feasible. So it would suggest that the only way the next step will work, the anaerobic digestion will work, is if we're co-digesting with maybe animal slurry or perhaps grass. So that, I think, is one of the interesting outcomes. The other issue with just digesting willow on its own is that the idea here was that we would put the digestate back onto the soil as a biofertilizer. The actual nutrient value of digestate from 100% willow is very, very poor. So its value as a biofertilizer will again be too low. So it does suggest to us that co-digestion will be essential.
Thanks, JJ. Neil, and then I'll bring JP in.
Yeah, sorry, no, just to mention, just on the bottlenecks, I suppose from our perspective, Shanny BC, in terms of the testing, JJ touched on it there, but there are a lot of parameters to consider in terms of the impact on the bioactives, right? So you have 30 different varieties, multiple locations where they're being grown, as well as different times of year that they're being harvested. So, and you're looking at more than one bioactive and more than one bioactivity. So when you actually take all of that into account and you're trying to test them in the lab in the in vitro setting that we are using, it's a massive amount. So we are very limited with the amount of samples that we can actually process meaningfully. So we are slightly reduced by the scale that we can work with in the lab. So we have to be as selective as we can. So I mentioned previously about looking at teasing out the activities and what the source of them are from the extracts. But one thing that we're really hoping to focus on, it started in next year, is the comparison between the locations of where the willow is grown, as well as the variety. Because, like JP mentioned earlier, that it's trying to find that sweet spot of biomass production and bioactive production. So, is it happening after 6 months? Is it happening after 2 years? To try and figure out the best use of the growth cycle. So that's it. That's a bottleneck from our side in terms of testing. Yeah. So you said I mentioned that as well, just because ideally in a perfect world, we'd love to consider and identify all of those factors, but we are a bit limited, unfortunately.
Thanks, Neil. JP, I have a couple of questions for you, but if you want to add to what the guys have been saying.
Yeah, I think the boys made a very valid points in the bottlenecks, and I think from the point of view of the AD, we've definitely seen a limitation within reason. But one of the things we have investigated and we are trialing would be that these trays would be used for a food tray within one of the supermarkets. So what you'd have is you'd have the food and the tray going into an AD type plant. And that's an option for us. I think from this project, we just need to prove that it's degraded, that it does work, that we can put it into an AD plant and break it down. Because we extract the bark from this, the lignin content within the pulp is a lot less, so we find that it breaks down a lot easier. The only issue we do have to prove is the viability of it. Now, the CO2 is also an extraction that we need to look at. I just see a note there from Noel, and in fairness, he makes a very valid point. You know, one of the things that could happen here is that when you take that packaging, or you could, for example, look at, as we said, the byproducts we've looked at for bark, but also once that's done, it may not go to an AD plant. You could very much produce a biomass product for end of life cycle as well. For this project, I think just we had to prove that it would degrade, that it could go into an AD plant, it would co-digest, and then we would have a method and put it back onto the ground from a point of view of fertilizer. So, you know, as JJ made a very valid point, it's co-digestion probably, but the question here is you wouldn't have the quantity to justify an AD plant for this. You know, this is something that go into an existing AD plant, and can we prove that it will break down within that plant? And that's the principle of that test, in which we're starting to think we can do. But that's just another continuation. Just one more point as well on the packaging with Adam, and he's not here today. He's been quite successful in actually producing packaging as it is, 100% Willow, 80 to 80%, 20% Willow versus cardboard. So we are finding we can produce packaging from it. One of the interesting parts from our point of view would be new directives coming in for packaging. And I think perhaps this will open an opportunity from the point of view of BioWill as well. So just 2 points there.
Thanks, JP. And just maybe to go a little bit deeper on the packaging side, what type of typical fossil-based plastics do you think the product you're producing can potentially replace?
I wouldn't be, I suppose Adam really should be the man to answer that question. I'd say, James, I wouldn't be as I suppose technically aware or technically able to answer that question. All I do know is from the point of view of the two, one supermarket, one pharmaceutical company we're dealing with, they are quite eager to move into this type of packaging. They see the Willow as being a good option as a natural material. So again, I would really need Adam to come in there, unless JJ or Chris.
Well, I think the interest in as JP said, a very major supermarket chain is interested in what we're doing. They're currently using bio-based material, so biomass packaging. But an issue that has arisen in the last number of years post-COVID is supply chain. So they're using sugarcane bagasse as the feedstock for their packaging materials. They're using rice straw, and whereas these are potentially cheaper than Willow. The issue they have, or they foresee, is supply chain, because they've had difficulty in the last few years and this is both a cost, because the supply chain issues are obviously a cost, because transport is now so much higher. So if you're bringing a container load of packaging material from China, which is manufactured from rice straw, the transport pre-COVID was a very low component of your overall costs. Now the transport is actually the most significant component of the availability of containers, combined with high fuel costs. So that's why there's an interest in just shortening the supply chain and having local growers and allowing that to feed into the overall sustainability metrics of the supply, the food supply chain, from distribution to consumer.
JJ, and just a question, you mentioned earlier that you believe this is feasible at relatively small scale. What scale are you talking about? You don't have to quantify, it can be a geographical location, or it can be...
I would say almost the same size as your typical dairy co-op, you know, for want of just to map it on to something that we would be familiar with.
Okay.
You know, so we're talking about that scale, technically feasible, and we will be undertaking a full techno-economic evaluation of this, and that will be undertaken, you know, by people who have, not us, we're going to outsource that to the likes of one of the major accountancy firms, because we want, you know, an objective set of eyes to look at this, because obviously if people have to put their hands in their pockets, there needs to be, it needs to be credible in terms of the financing.
Thanks, JJ. And coming to JP for a minute. So we researchers think we operate in the real world, and we try to operate in the real world, but you do operate in the real world. So what do you think in terms of, we'll say, bringing this to the next level? What is the opportunity? Who would need to be brought in to make this possible? What kind of partners would be needed to make this possible, to actually bring this to the next level and to commercial scale?
I think the basis behind this project has always been, James, is that we have a high value extract at the beginning. So that then determines the size of what this project needs to be. I know Isabella asked the question there of does the farmer undertake this entire process? What we envisage is that some of that debarking may happen on site, and then that materials will move to a centralized location, hydrolyzed, and basically we take our extracts from that. There is a market out there at the moment for the replacement of synthetically produced ingredients for pharmaceutical products. This is one of the better ones that's presenting an alternative. So I think from the point of view of a replacement to a natural anti-inflammatory product, this is quite exciting. And we do know there's 2 or 3 pharmaceutical companies watching this project quite closely for those deliverables. The interesting part is what we do afterwards. The packaging certainly for me is an opportunity from 2 means. One, that we have a replacement for existing packaging, and I think JJ makes the point very validly, there should never be packaging at all, to be quite honest with you, but if we do need packaging, it is an alternative. And as a second, as a method of as a method for the anaerobic digestion that we have been able to prove the point that it will break down. So if you look at the varying elements along this chain here, there's a number of realistic deliverables here. The questions I would be asking is, you know, and because it's pharmaceutical, this does take longer. You know, we have shelf life understanding. We need to see how the materials manage over time. We need to see their behavior on shelf life, for example. There's a lot of combinations there we do need to question. But there is definitely, from the point of view of 3 parts of deliverables here, that's just as in growing, extracting for pharmaceutical, the packaging and the AD are alternative, a business plan here. It's what size we do it and how do you optimize it is the question. And then at the same time, who owns it? So, you know, I think it's from looking from the outside in, the reason why we changed, I suppose, in fairness to JJ and the gang here, our thinking has been the deliverables, obviously, for Interreg, but in parallel is a business plan. Does this make financial sense? And I think, as JJ made a very good point on, it will be done from an outside source. But, you know, if you're replacing salicylic acid, you're looking for, for minimum amount you're paying 70, 80, 100 euro for a kg. The Nordic companies are now looking for alternative bioactives. And this is the market we can pretty much hit. And this can feed into any product, anti-inflammatory, skincare. In the veterinary side would be elements such as, you know, wound, acute wound, etc. These are all applications for this product. So there's a wide application as a replacement for a synthetically based product. It is positive, to be honest with you, James. The bottlenecks are something that would have to be understood. But I think this is quite viable, to be honest with you.
JP, it sounds like, and I know the energy landscape is changing in terms of prices there, but it does sound like the salicylins are a big part of the business case behind this.
It is, yeah, absolutely, James. And from my point of view, I think after that, everything is what has been treated and would be treated as a waste. What you're doing at the moment is you're taking willow tree and you're using it for an energy crop. The belief here is maybe the energy should be secondary here, and that we should look at taking the value from that material before we ever use it for an energy base. And thus, I think that extra step has now brought a financial viability to this project for growers. because now they have two elements. Worst case scenario, they have two elements here which are commercially viable. But you're right there, James. Absolutely.
Thanks, JP. So a question, and after this we might get into some more questions from the audience if people want to raise hands and ask a question. But just a final question, maybe for Neil, Chris, or JJ, whoever wants to answer it, is looking at this potential of salicylic acid or phytochemicals from Willow. Are there other tree species that you have in mind that might be very interesting to look at from an Irish perspective as well in future?
If I could take that.
Yeah, I was going to pass to JJ there.
Yeah, I think we already know that birch is for a molecule called betulinic acid, which is a precursor for a number of pharmaceutical products. So birch grows very rapidly as well. It's a bit like willow. It's not quite short rotation, but it has a rapid growing cycle, and it grows very well under the conditions that prevail in West Europe. I would, longer term, I think that there is the potential here for an extractives industry, because a lot of the equipment that you would use in your biorefinery, if you like, would be, it's essentially the same unit operations, regardless of the feedstock plant you're going to use for your extraction. So long term, I would envisage that there's the potential here for a number of for farmers growing a number of different plants. Again, let's call them phytomedicinal plants, and so the biorefinery could be used right through an annual cycle. You would have a willow harvesting period. You would run campaigns, basically, the same as the pharmaceutical companies run a campaign. So typically, a pharmaceutical company may run a campaign on a particular drug, which will fulfill the market needs for the next year, and then they will use the same factory for making another drug. And I would envisage longer term that this is, that's how this would actually operate. So the plant would be generic, but the products would be specific.
I think it's a very important question, because ultimately I feel that the Irish flora is underutilized, and if, like you're saying, JJ, if you're able to set up that system where you can plug in, it's almost modular in terms of what you're processing. Now, there are going to be lots of variations between the bioresource, but there's so much potential there. Very interesting discussions only yesterday with the collaborators of ours about the flora that we have here and what it contains, and a lot of it is overlooked and underutilized. So I think there's a lot of potential there, and as well as that is we're kind of hoping that the momentum that we gain from BioWill and the data that's produced from the bioactives in particular will kind of help break the stigma of it's herbal, or it's kind of what's homeopathy or something like that. There's real science there. It's really effective, and it's not a coincidence that a lot of pharmaceuticals are derived from natural compounds. So we're really hoping that it will shift the attitude towards Irish flora and its use.
Thanks, Neil. I see that Adam has joined us. Hi, Adam. So Adam Carton from Bangor University. So I know you're involved as well, Adam, within the project. Do you want to talk and give maybe a brief update of the work that you're involved in within the BioWill project?
Yeah, sure. Apologies for joining so late. I've had, as I said, major broadband issues here. Just got those resolved. So yeah, apologies for that. Yeah, so I'm based at the Biocomplex Centre at Bangor University, and we've been processing these woody type residues for about the last 30 years for a range of different applications, predominantly construction applications when we set up. But yeah, so our part in BioWill is to look at the cellulose component of the debarked willow with a view to converting that into pulp molded packaging for food packaging, specifically fruit and vegetable packaging. So one of the challenges that everybody's aware of at the moment is the single-use plastics issue. And one of the potential alternative formats for that is to use something called molded pulp. So, you know, you'll all be aware that you can buy your fruit and vegetables and even white goods in these molded pulp products at the moment. These are sort of made from cardboard or newsprint. And one of the challenges there is that actually the cost of newsprint specifically is going up, you know, anywhere between 120 and 150 euros per ton, just because there's little of it around at the moment. So for that reason, people are looking at alternative cellulose feedstocks, and these agricultural or forestry residues are ideal candidates. So the other challenge, I think, is a lot of these molded pulp products until recently were made in manufactured in China. So I think with certainly where we are in mainland UK, you know, costs of shipping these products back from mainland China to the UK is becoming a problem now. So there is a need to find these alternative feedstocks. So one of the biggest challenges with these lignocellulosic or woody residues is the pre-treatment step. So you need to access the cellulose fibres in order to create the molded pulp packaging. And what we're doing at Bangor University, and have been doing for a number of years, is pre-treating these woody type residues in such a way that we can access the fibres. And then we do have sort of pilot scale technology that enables us to convert those fibres into packaging formats for a range of different applications. And as I said, that's what we're doing as part of BioWill. But again, I would say one of the biggest challenges, I think, is how you pre-treat these materials in a scalable and cost-effective manner.
Thanks, Adam. And how is the packaging performing so far in the analysis that you've been conducting, or are you at that stage yet?
Pretty good. So again, I'm sure colleagues have mentioned that we had delays on the project as many other projects did with COVID. So we really only started processing Willow last July, but yeah, we started producing packaging materials so far, and yeah, the initial results look good. I think in terms of functionality, because we're targeting fresh produce to start with, specifically fruit and vegetables, there are fewer functionality issues than if you're looking for sort of high or low temperature applications, things like oven ready meals. But yeah, the functionality of these materials look good. You know, we know we can repulp them. So in terms of, you know, recyclability, there are options there. And as JP and JJ would have told you, that, you know, one of the options we're looking at in BioWill is to convert that utilised packaging into biogas. So yeah, in terms of functionality, you know, they're looking okay. The results are looking okay. But as always, you know, it's the cost margins that are important. These are commodity products, so we need to be able to produce them at in a cost-effective manner.
Very good. And I know we talked about this at the start of the seminar. We talked about the potential for carbon sequestration via the production of biomass, but then obviously there's potential mitigation along the chain because you're replacing plastics potentially, or replacing fossil fuels. So I'm just wondering, from your project perspective, are you considering the life cycle assessment aspects? Is there any indication of how that's looking so far? And I don't know who wants to come in on that.
Maybe I could. So one of the things that we are investigating as well, so and JP mentioned one of the deliverables on the project was to see if the Willow was digestible, if we could degrade it microbially. And one of, I suppose, the potentially interesting facets of this is that we get a low biogas yield, which does suggest that to us that there's a lot of what we call recalcitrant carbon within Willow. So during anaerobic digestion, the volatile carbon will form biogas, but the amount of undigestible material, which in this case is quite high, that represents what we call a recalcitrant carbon stock. So we're going to put that into the ground, into the soil, and over the next couple of years, we're going to measure how fast or how slowly it will degrade. And we will compare it against just raw willow. So we will take some of the willow itself, we will chop it up, we will put it into the soil, and in a plot, you know, which is adjacent to that, we're going to put in some of the digestate. And we're going to sample that over a number of years to determine if it can be used as a carbon stock for enhancing the amount, increasing the amount of carbon within, you know, what we call the soil organic carbon stream. Because, as I said, the nutrient value is low, but there may be some other potential benefits to it.
Thanks, JJ. And we have a question from Tracy O'Connor, who's asking, are there different licensing requirements for felling birch and other tree species compared with willow? Also, if the focus of willow coppicing is products other than fuel, are there licensing restrictions which could prove challenging for growers or farmers?
To be honest, I'm not sure, but I have no insight. Maybe Chris does on the licensing for harvesting. Certainly for willow coppicing, there are no additional regulations. So
yeah, I was just going to say the same, JJ. I've never been aware of any specific licensing conditions for coppicing willow, and there's certainly no requirement to prove what you're using it for. So I can't imagine that would come into play. But from a pharmaceutical point of view, possibly JP is better to answer that one.
I genuinely don't know. I don't know, to be honest, either, Chris. I know from point of view of. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know that answer the question.
Question from Vincent Farley. Have you tried mycovalorization via fungal solid state fermentation as a pre-step to improve biogas yields?
It's a good question, and it's one of the things we are looking at the moment. So that we do have one of our colleagues, and maybe Adam could speak to it, in Bangor, and he is using the willow as a substrate for growing mushrooms, basically, or specific types of mushrooms.
And Vincent's just left his email address, Neil and Tim, so it might be something we can pass on to the team if there's potential for future collaboration. We might just finish then with a question. It's really on the next step, how you would see potentially the results you've had so far, taking that to the next level. Do you, currently, in terms of a TRL opportunity, do you go for a kind of demonstration project, or would the view be going to kind of straight to commercial scale based on where you are at the moment?
I think a lot of this depends on the business plan, which will be undertaken. But from our perspective, we would hope that we can go for an NWE commercialization grant. And the level of funding is lower in terms of, you know, Interreg is 60-40 for what we call fundamental projects such as this. If we were to go for commercialization, you know, the requirement, we would have to get some interested industry partners who would put cash on the table. And certainly the secretariat in Lille have expressed interest, but obviously this is predicated completely on the outcome of the business viability plan.
You want to come in?
I just wanted to get say one extra thing, James, just before we sort of finish up, because I think it would be quite interesting. You know, there are some major targets, of course, to reach these net zero 2050 ambitions that we have, and certainly from a UK government perspective, and I'm sure it's similar in the South as well. You know, there is an ambition to really upscale the biomass that's being grown, whether it's forestry or but energy crops comes right in there, or biomass crops specifically comes right in there. And the UK government's actually put about, I think it's 38 million into innovation in biomass crops. Now, it's a real difficult sell. I think we would agree, both sides of the border here, but biomass crops are a difficult, tricky sell because of the lack of a market. Yet the benefits, the multifunctional benefits, are very well understood. Sorry about that. That's yeah, they're very well understood. So something like this, which could possibly bring about a market, which would encourage farmers and agricultural land base to diversify to an extent parts of their farm, areas which maybe aren't as good as other parts of other areas, which we're running a thing called a soil nutrient health scheme in Northern Ireland here at the moment, which is to help farmers pinpoint areas of land which may be contributing to environmental pollution. And some of the options are, well, why not focus those areas for interventions, such as thirsty crops like willows. So what if this is part of that solution that can help farmers actually be excited and interested in planting a crop that could have a value and is not just helping their environment, but is also giving a real economic return. And I think that's something that would excite me about BioWill.
Thanks, Chris. Totally agree with that. Adam, do you want to come in?
Yeah, James, your specific comment about what's the next stage. So, I mean, most of the technologies certainly we're using at Bangor are sort of pilot scale. So, TRL 3-4. So, for us, the next, and that's going to be the case at Limerick as well. I think the next stage is demonstration scale. We know that the technologies we're using are scalable, but it's just about making the economics look right, and you can only really do that moving to the next scale, I think. So, I think we're already at pilot scale. A lot of this is building on fundamental research that's been conducted at all the institutions over a number of years, and we're at that pilot scale stage already, I think.
Thanks, Adam. And JP and Neil, I don't know if you want to come in for a last word.
From my point of view, James, I think that the value of the bioactives is key to this. As an alternative, I think by extracting that from the bark, it's not to say the remaining pulp could go in a direction, but I think that's the key to this has always been there is absolutely a market out there for this. This is a little bit more exciting, whereby we've now found a mechanism by we can take an extract that might have more value from a medical point of view in its application, and yet it might have a lot less cost in extraction, where you're not specifically trying to extract a specific element from that. So that's been a really positive outcome from this project. So it's really going to be down to the work we do over the next probably year with Neil and the gang, and how we define and Italo within our own group, how we define that. And I think that's going to be the key, because after that, everything else is a bonus, to be honest. It's just how we optimize it.
I suppose there's a couple of steps then in terms of progressing the data that we are getting for the bioactives. We're looking at that in a monoculture, of human cells in a flask. So that's, it's very important information that's used a lot, but it's about advancing those models to get it one step closer to, the efficacy that you might see or hope to see in an actual human. So we have options there. So as well as progressing the models that we're working with, which we're intending to do, we also want to progress the addition of the bioactives to those models. So at the moment, they're in extractive form and solution. And so what we're hoping to work towards is to put them into a prototype formulation of which would be essentially a product that you would be applying topically to the skin. And so those are two progressions that we'll work towards in parallel next year, and we have capability to test those as well. We have volunteering panels in Kerry, and some interesting pieces of equipment to test those in as well. So it's just about the translation of the data and the translation of the findings in towards the more I won't say clinical setting, but you know what I mean. You say the real life model.
I think also there's also, James, there's a lot of farmers out there, and I think Isabella has made that point before. There's a lot of farmers out there who are very willing to look at this. They're looking for these opportunities. They already have willow planted within reason. So I think the cell, as long as we can prove the viability of this, it might be as difficult to roll out. As Chris said, it meets a lot of its targets outside of this extraction. So for that reason, it's probably a good time for this project.
Thanks, JP. And look, Ireland has ambitious targets in terms of increasing forestry, and I think that for sure a forest biorefinery from an Irish perspective would be a very positive thing, and the work that you're all doing is very, very important. I think it also shows the importance of collaboration between different institutes, bringing together different expertise, but also collaborating with industry, because that's where the real impact can happen. So well done to everyone. Thanks to you all. So thanks to Chris Johnson, JP Prendergast, Neil Burke, Adam Charlton and JJ Leahy. And thanks to everyone for participating and your questions. It'll be recorded, so I'm sure it'll be available for people to watch back and to get in touch with the team later with any questions you have and collaboration opportunities and so on. Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.